So up until today, we've only been talking about parallelograms. Okay? We have these lovely figures, and I want you, once you cut your cardstock apart, your flashcards, to go back and look at these and review them. The very top one gave us arrows on the sides of the parallelogram. Okay? So why does a parallelogram have these kind of have this kind of a designation? What does this mean?
Both sides are parallel.
Both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. That's the definition of a parallelogram. Okay? The second one has some tick marks on it. What did those tick marks mean?
Equal.
Equal. So congruent. Yes, both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. Okay? You have to be able to come up with these statements about parallelograms like that. And that's what the flashcards are going to help you do. The next one shows me some arcs. What do these arcs mean?
Angles equal.
What kind of angles?
Opposite.
Opposite angles are congruent. That's true of all parallelograms. Okay? The third one had ticks inside of the parallelogram. What did those mean? The diagonals bisect each other. Okay? So we have to be able to pick that up and be able to tell that immediately. Okay? The next one showed arrows and tick marks here. What did that mean?
Parallel and equal.
One pair of sides is parallel and equal. That's enough to make it a parallelogram. Okay? And then we talked about angles, and we had 180 with them. What does that mean? And what was the name we used for those angles? No. These are opposites, right? And these are, not corresponding, starts with a C though, consecutive. The consecutive angles in a parallelogram are supplementary. They add to 180. Okay. Then we had 3 formulas, and I gave you these formulas on the quiz with matching, and some of you struggled with that. Okay? Be thankful I didn't just ask you for the formulas outright, but by the time we get to the test, you should know them, and you should be able to write them down. So the first one was n minus 2 times 180, and that was the what? Angle sum. Okay? All of them added up. The sum of the interior angles. Please. Okay, guys, please. Okay. Then what happened if we took the sum of the interior angles and we divided it by n? What did we get? Yep, each interior angle of a regular polygon. Okay? And then what happened if we took 360 and we divided that by n? That was each exterior angle of a regular polygon. Okay? Because all the exterior angles, no matter how many sides there are, always add up to 360. All right, so today we're going to talk about these figures. And we're going to start in the middle column at the very bottom. Okay? And we're going to fill this out. So, rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. Okay? We're going to get them all actually in here. That was really tiny. If you were seeing that, you were doing well. That's good. People in the back probably couldn't. All right, so what kind of a figure is this? First of all, what do these ticks mean? It's a parallelogram, and okay, what do all these ticks mean?
They're equal sides.
All equal, right? So this is an equilateral quadrilateral. Okay? So this is the very bottom. Yep. Okay? In your middle column, the very bottom one, this is rhombus. Okay? So a rhombus is a parallelogram that has 4 congruent sides. So you'll want to write rhombus and then parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Bless you. Bless you. Uh-huh. Oh, we're going to have them up here in just a second. Okay? Next one. What does this guy look like? No, and you're not helping. Rectangle. Okay? All 4 angles are congruent. Okay? on. So a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 congruent angles. Okay? This is an equiangular parallelogram or quadrilateral. Okay? This next one has right angles and it has ticks. So what kind of a figure is it? A square. A square is a regular quadrilateral. It doesn't because my projector's projecting differently. Okay? So this is the square is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Okay? A square is a specialized rectangle. It's also a specialized rhombus. It's a blend between the two. Okay? The next figure shows a parallelogram with a 90-degree angle inside of it. Okay? That's a rhombus because the diagonals of a rhombus are perpendicular. That's the one, this one, yep. That's the middle one. Okay? The diagonals of a rhombus are perpendicular. Okay? So those diagonals are going to form 4 right angles within the figure. Second to last one is a rhombus, and it's got all kinds of angle marks down here. What do those angle marks mean? They're congruent. So the diagonals of a rhombus bisect a pair of, each diagonal of a rhombus bisects a pair of opposite angles. Okay? And finally, our last one has a parallelogram. And notice the tick marks in this parallelogram on the diagonals. Okay? We have single tick marks here. So this is a rectangle. The diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. All right, so everybody's got their whole card filled out? Almost? Got scissors to cut out. Oh, this is really long. Pass one to Nolan, please. I have some scissors. They're not very big. We'll pass around the big ones. I need a rubber band. Huh? That was what that was. Yeah. The bottom one is the rhombus. That's where you're starting. All right, rubber bands coming around. Got one already? Okay. Anyone finished with the big scissors? Not yet? All right, so it's a good idea to have a piece of scrap paper out for some quick notes. I think it'll help you remember them if you're actually doing the problems and not just watching. You're welcome. 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 We are. That's the plan anyway. All right, everybody get a rubber band? Awesome. Awesome. Okay. All right, so here we go. Liam, did you have your... Okay. Hopefully you find it for tomorrow. All right, here we go. So here are the kinds of questions that you can see on your homework today, and on the quizzes and on the tests. Gentlemen, please. Okay? These are the types of questions that we may see. So first of all, when you see a question like this, for any rectangle ABCD, decide whether the statement is always or sometimes true. You have to be able to justify. Okay, is it always or sometimes true? So, what's the first thing I should probably do to be able to figure this out? Draw it. Draw a picture. Okay? So we're going to draw a rectangle. Try to draw a straight line there. And I'll put my 4 right angles in it, so I know it's a rectangle. Okay? Now, do I know for sure when I label it A, B, C, D, that the distance between A and B, is it always or sometimes going to be equal to the distance between B and C? A and B, B and C. Not necessarily always, right? So is it possible that it could be? So we're going to put sometimes down. Question. Right. In this case, I drew it excessively large to make it look like it, right? But what if I had drawn it like this? Would you agree then that they appear to be? Okay. So this is sometimes true. No more. Ladies, please. Okay. So this is sometimes true. It will be true if it's a square. Okay? Makes sense? Okay? Not always. It's not always going to be true, but it will be true if this happens to be a square. The second question says, how about now? Always or sometimes if A, the distance between A and B is equal to the distance between C and D.
Always.
That's always going to be true because, why? It's a parallelogram. And opposite, all rectangles are parallelograms, right? And opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. Just 1 second. Okay? Everybody good with that? All right, so those are the kinds of questions that you're going to see. Thank you very much. Okay. Another question. They can give you just an image, and they can ask you what kind of special quadrilateral we have here. Nolan, enough. Okay.
That is a lie, honestly. These are scissors to ask you.
Okay, we're over. We're disrupting class. I'm trying to do it cool. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh-huh. No. You're disrupting my class. I'm not going to let you go to the restroom. I'm trying to get through this so people are paying attention. Okay? Thank you. Good question. Okay? So they're wanting to make sure that you know how these things are related to each other. So Peyton noticed that we have a pair of marks that mean that those sides are parallel to each other. And we have another pair of marks showing that those sides are parallel to each other. But why do we have a tick mark here and that same tick mark there? Because it's a rhombus. So they're going to reveal just enough information for you to be able to figure it out without giving it all away. Okay? They're being careful and selective about how much they tell you. So they're telling you this is a parallelogram, and they're telling you that we have two sides that are congruent. Not opposite sides, consecutive sides. So that makes this be a rhombus because since it's a parallelogram, opposite sides have to be congruent. And since the consecutive sides were congruent, all four sides end up being congruent. Does that make sense? So that means that would mean that the diagonals would bisect the angles, and that we'd have a 90-degree right angle where those diagonals intersect. So it is a rhombus, and then we have to explain our reasoning, and we know it's a parallelogram. So you'd say, I've got a parallelogram with consecutive sides congruent. Okay? And that forces the opposite sides to be congruent, so all four sides are congruent. So that's the kind of rationale I want to see on your homework and that I want to see on your quizzes and tests, okay, to get full credit for those. Okay? All right. We can also ask you to find the measures of angles 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they'll tell you, hey, by the way, this is a rhombus. Okay? So we have to find all four sides, or I'm sorry, all four angles that are marked up there. Okay? So Stephen, can you tell me one of the angles up there? I like that. Why? Okay? And what do we know about rhombuses with angles? Some people call them rhombi. That's okay as well. But what do we know about a rhombus and the angles? Check your flashcards that you've cut out. What do we know about the diagonals of a rhombus? Not congruent. Diagonals of a rectangle are congruent or equal. They're find your card, guys. Don't just guess. Diagonals of a rhombus, what do? They bisect a pair of opposite angles. So I like the fact that 61 down here, 61 here, 61, and 61. Okay, 1 is 90. Why is 1 90, Jaden? It's a right angle because the diagonals of a rhombus form 4 right angles. Okay, Megan, please. Okay. Okay, now, what about angle 4? 180 minus 90 is 90 left. So 90 minus 61 is 129. Okay. We could also have used the fact that consecutive angles are supplementary. So if this is 122, 180 minus 122 would get us 58 here, and bisected is 29 each. That only happens with rhombus and square, that you get the angles bisected. Okay? All right. Here's a perfect example of how someone in the construction industry uses geometry every day. If they measure one of the angles of this opening, this window opening, and they find out that it is 90 degrees, does that make it a rectangle? Yes. Why? Opposite sides are congruent, so we have a parallelogram. Okay, because the opposite sides are congruent, it's a parallelogram, and that means that opposite angles have to be congruent. And what makes these two have to be 90 degrees? Consecutive angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. 90 minus 180, 180 minus 90 is 90. Everybody good with those? Okay. Next example. Now we have a rectangle, and the distance between A and C is 7x minus 5. And the distance between B and D is 2x plus 25. So 7x minus 15, 2x plus 25. Your gut instinct is always to set them equal, right? But you have to know why you're setting them equal. Thank you. You done with this one? Okay. So what about the diagonals of a rectangle? Check your cards. Diagonals of a rectangle, what do they do? The diagonals of a rectangle. They're congruent. That's why we can say 7x minus 15 equals 2x plus 25. Okay, we can't just look and see that we have two things and set them equal to each other. We need to know why. So, taking away 2x from both sides and adding 15 to both sides, x equals 8. Am I done? No. Because it didn't ask for x, it asks for the measures, right? So 7 times 8 minus 15. 56 minus 15 is how much? Bless you. 41. And they're equal to each other, so they both have to be 41. Okay? Next example, last example. Okay? They can ask you to graph a quadrilateral and then decide whether it's a parallelogram, a rectangle, a rhombus, a square. List all the things that apply, all the names that apply. So you're going to have some of these kinds of problems on your homework. If you want to write this one out so you can work it with me, I've got graph paper, and you can use the same graph paper for your assignment. Not a lot. Nope. Okay. All right. So, first impression when you look at it, what do you think?
I think we're going to have to use, like, measures.
Got to find some side measurements. I agree. Because to be a rhombus or a square, we have to see if the sides, the consecutive sides, are congruent. Okay? So here's a question. How do we figure out if we have right angles? guys. You're on the right track. How do we know if we have right angles? We can, if we want to know if it's a parallelogram or not, we can find the midpoints to see if the diagonals bisect each other, right? But how can I find out if this is a right angle or not? How do I figure out if it's a right angle or not? I heard someone say the magic word. Slope. What do we know about right angles and slope?
It is right angle because that's a concept.
All right, so this one rose 4, and it ran 1. And this one fell 1 and ran 4. So its slope was negative 1/4, and this one was a positive 4/1. So it has a 90-degree angle there. That was quick. Did everybody catch that? Okay. Perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals. Flip and negate, right? So we know we have right angles, at least one of them. This has also got a rise of 1, falling of 1, and running of 4. And this one is rising 4 and running 1. Okay, 4 right angles. So we know it's at least a rectangle, right? Okay. Now that slope is going to help you because this looks like a right triangle to me. So how can I find C? Well, good question. This is angle C, right? So how can I find the distance between A and B? I want to confuse you by throwing another variable. So we have a right triangle here. Negative 1 squared plus 4 squared is the distance between A and B squared. What is negative 1 squared? What's 4 squared?
16.
So 1 plus 16 is 17. So if AB squared is 17, the square root of 17 is the distance between A and B. So we can use Pythagorean's theorem here, or we can straight up use the distance formula. But once you've found the slope, it's a lot easier to use the Pythagorean theorem. Okay? If I'm using a positive 4 and a positive 1 here, won't I get the same result when I find this one's distance? So the distance between B and C is also square root of 17. So what kind of figure do we have?
We have
A rhombus. You told me earlier it was a rectangle. And parallelogram I like, and also square. Make sense? Distance formula, slope. Yes. This is our notes, basically. Okay. Now I'll have this posted to the web with the video and the notes, so you can go back over it if you need to. And there are examples like this in the book too. All right, everybody good? We have an assignment. Now, when you look at the problem numbers, don't freak out because it's a 2-day assignment.
Oh, it's 2 days.
We're starting today. Okay. Do what you would normally do for work today. So if you would normally do about 15 problems, try to work 15 problems tonight, and then we'll finish it tomorrow. Okay? It's a long assignment. All right, let me stop my recording.